Welcome to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. I'm Melissa Joy, a certified financial planner and the founder of Pearl Planning. My goal is to help you streamline and organize your finances, navigate big money decisions with confidence, and be strategic in order to grow your wealth. As a woman, you work hard for your money, and I'm here to help you make the most of it. Now, let's get into the show. Talking about money, we're talking about cash flow. We're really thinking about where does the money go? And we're going to start that conversation in the context of businesses. We're talking to an expert on keeping books for business owners. So Ronisa Clark is joining us today, and she has operated as an accountant for a government agency for more than a decade, and she's using those skills today as founder of Dream Joy Consulting. She's also a certified QuickBooks Pro advisor, and Ronisa's here to talk about things to think about as a business owner, whether you're thinking you should be a business owner or planning to be, or if you're in the thick of it. And then we're going to try to use some of those conversations and skills to kind of relay great cash flow basics to the rest of you, our audience. So Ronisa, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so glad you're here. I want to talk about, kind of keeping your finances in order, especially for business owners. I know that sometimes you kind of start with working with people when it's a cleanup job. They're like, I know I've been trying to do it myself, but it's just not working. Or we had a bookkeeper, but it wasn't working out. I know that's a common, kind of issue and concern. Yes. So tell me, when do people start working with you? What are they thinking about? What are the 911 calls all about?
Yes. So some of the 911 calls that I've received are usually around tax time. They've reached out to a tax accountant and they've generated what they believe is their profit and loss. And depending on that tax accountant, they may or may not offer bookkeeping services. And so most of the time, if they do not offer the bookkeeping services, they're in a panic because the accountant will generally say something is wrong and you need to hire a bookkeeper. And so the business owner at that point is panicking because you do need to file your taxes. You don't want to file an extension or you don't want to have penalties, but it draws attention to, well, I generated this piece of paper, but this piece of paper is not reflective of my business. So that's one of the reasons why they're running and it's on fire, because they have to hit a tax deadline. Another reason that I've seen people come finding me is they need to get a bank loan or a car loan, and they've gone to, again, generate the financial statements from their accounting system, and the banker looks at them and says, I'm sorry, I'm not understanding. There are a lot of things that are wrong with your chart of accounts. Please go seek out an accountant or a bookkeeper to help them rectify that for you. So those are just two instances. And I'm quite sure there's a plethora of other instances out there for people that have ran into some snags where they've generally used their accounting system to generate this piece of paper that's supposed to be reflective of the business, just to find out that there's a lot of different nuances that have not been addressed, which of course probably puts the light bulb on that says, oh, that's why my cash balance on my bank account doesn't match what's on the system.
Yes, it turns out the money in your business account that's left at the end of the year doesn't always exactly match what you may owe in taxes. Sometimes all the time, you may need to pay into systems like Social Security and Medicare with both sides of the employment taxes, whereas if you are used to a W-2 income, it's only one side. There's other considerations, and you can't just come into your CPA's office nowadays with a box of receipts or just like a pencil scratch of like, we started with this much and we ended with this much, and have reportable numbers to kind of operate in modern financial times.
Yep.
So when you're getting people organized, I'm assuming, do you kind of start with like, here's a standard chart of accounts? By chart of accounts, that's like basically, well, tell me what it is.
Sure. So in the simplest terms that I've been able to think of, it's like totes. So you have a different tote. Let's say if you're cleaning up your kids' room, and you might have a tote that's for books. You might have a tote that's for trucks. You might have a tote that's for dolls. So these different totes are carrying different values inside them. So a chart of account is a name that is to carry either an expense or income or a transaction, we'll just say, is to carry a transaction for a specific purpose. So an example of a good chart of account is office expense. It's very general, but it gets to the point. You understand that an office expense would be things that you would use in your office,
Mm-hmm.
right? What is not a good chart of account is, let's say, Amazon. Amazon is the name of a vendor. If you have a chart of account that is called Amazon, that doesn't really tell me as a bookkeeper what's inside of that transaction. So, because you can use Amazon to buy cost of goods sold, you can buy office supplies, you might even buy furniture,
Right.
right? So, having Amazon as a chart of account is not a good chart of account in different instances. So it also varies too based on the industry and the type of business that you have. But that's just one way to kind of think of it as totes.
I love that example. So the chart of accounts is kind of a category for what expenses are. It also could be category for income. You might need that to track if you have different
Yeah.
streams of revenue, for example. And then you may also keep some information about things that you have over time, like your furniture or your
Yes.
computer equipment and things like that.
Yes.
So when do you? So I will tell you, I actually own a couple businesses. I own Pearl Planning, and which is a financial planning company, obviously. And then I have what some people might call a side hustle. We own a short term rental,
Mhm.
a cabin in northern Michigan that is we rent on VRBO. And so one of them has QuickBooks for its profit and loss statement and balance sheet. It's more complicated. That's Pearl Planning. And then
Mhm.
we do actually, hopefully you don't cringe, use a spreadsheet when it comes to the other, because we basically have all like not as many expenses, and we have a reporting system through VRBO that tells us our income and calculates taxes. We enter the taxes elsewhere. But when do you graduate from, kind of keeping things by hand or in a spreadsheet to needing somebody like you, Renisa?
Yeah. Sure. So as a proponent of loving all things accounting
Yes.
systems, if you are able to get started on day one, that to me puts you in the mindset of you are planning to have this grow. If you are starting off and this is a hobby and this is just for fun, then it makes sense to just say, oh, I just want to make sure to keep track of the things so that if the accountant wants to track my hobbies and maybe I made some money here on the side and it's not really a business that you're trying to grow, then it does make sense to kind of utilize a spreadsheet. But from the beginning, if you know right away that you're trying to grow the business, you want to have this, put some effort into it, you want to see your numbers grow and you want to have goals, it is okay to start at zero and have an accounting system. The good thing is, which I know is a lot different than what it was, several years ago, but there are several different accounting systems that are online, some that do offer free services. So I know that sometimes is a deterrent on whether somebody does start using an accounting system is if there's like a charge, because you're like, oh, well, I'm not sure, I don't want to use that. While accounting systems are meant to be user friendly for the small business owners, a lot of times that's where a quick phone call or a quick YouTube video or even, contacting someone like myself for just some quick training can kind of help you, give you that great foundation. So that way, when you go from 0 to 100,000, you're not scrambling to say, oh no, I have 2 or 3 years worth of business expenses and I have never tracked it properly. And then you have to start over. So,
Yes. I did start on day one with the business with QuickBooks, and we graduated from having an employee and myself manage it to we use a financial planning specific outsourced solution. It's like a
mm-hmm,
fractional CFO.
mm-hmm,
And yeah, exactly like you're describing for the cottage. It's like we have no plans to scale. The one thing I've learned about the rental business is that for at least for me, I don't need multiple properties. Like this is just to
yeah,
offset some of the costs of having a second home, and
mm-hmm,
I know the difference. And so
yes,
one of the things I use for my books is it can give me some key performance indicators about how my business is doing that I think
yes.
are really useful. I'm just curious. Renisa, about what some of the indicators that you have. I mean, one would be, and I mean, I know this sounds basic, but some business owners need to hear this, is are you having to put your own personal money into the business or actually
Yes.
making money out of the business?
Yes. Yes. Very. It is one of the things that I feel like, and it pops up often when you start a business as like a side
Yep.
hustle. So that's essentially how I started as well. Where if you're working full time and then you start a business on the side, you essentially are the funder. You are putting in the money for seed
That's
money.
called bootstrapping
And
in the fancy VC
yes.
world. Most people's businesses are bootstrapped, including both of ours, right?
Yep.
No
Yep.
fancy funders. It's our own money, which
Yep.
matters a lot more
Our
as far as
own
I'm
money.
concerned.
Yes. Yes, yes. And that means you're also paying attention too, because you're like, oh, this, because now you're segmenting some of your paycheck and you're putting it into your business to either use it for advertising or you have to buy software or inventory, whatever it is, the type of business that you're starting. So once you have that, and then you're at the place of, I would like to go from side hustle to full time, you might feel emotionally ready because you're probably drained and you're tired, but do you really know that you're ready? And one of the ways to know is by looking in your business books, right? So if you're able to look in and you're seeing that you have revenues that are coming in and that your profit, your net profit is positive, then that is an indicator that you can see, okay, based on the last month, this is how much money I've made. And you can, especially if you have goals, I always encourage everyone to have some goals to be able to see it. And then that way you can see and say, okay, if I move from my full-time job to my full-time side hustle, then am I ready? Can I sustain myself? Can I sustain the same income that I have? Or am I halfway there? There are so many different questions that you may have, and you might be in feeling that right now. And that is one of the ways why using an accounting system, you can literally look at it and you don't have to guess. You don't have to look in the business bank account and say, well, I have $20,000 now. What does that mean? 20,000 in a bank account could mean anything, right? That's where the importance of having an accounting system, because that 20,000 should reconcile to your accounting system. Even if it is a spreadsheet, there should be some type of indication to say, this is what I've made for this past month. So that's one way, is to see, do you have a positive net income that is from revenues and expenses that are coming into your account? Have you cash flowed the bank account? So for example, that 20,000 that's in your bank, is that money that you put in? Right. And if that's the case, then that's still you funding your
That's a
business, and that's
loan to
not
your
revenues that's
business
coming.
in essence.
Right.
And
Yes.
it matters where that money came from. So I loaned my business in
Yes.
the beginning. I loaned it money, and I know that there could be a time, because I'm in a highly variable world where much of my income and revenue is tied to the performance of investments, where I have to think about my personal balance sheet too, especially since I have employees that I really care about them having stability of
Yes.
employment. That changes the way I think about my emergency reserves on my personal balance sheet. And that's something I need to explain to my spouse too, or have the
Yes.
financial planner
Yes.
explain.
Yes. Yes, definitely. Especially for if you have spouses, it is one of the ways that you can also be accountable, because if you are taking money that's out of the main household account and you're putting it over into the business account, you have something to show for it, to say, yes, I am making money. And now the business is either able to pay myself, I'm able to pay employees. And just like what Melissa was saying, that is huge when you, especially when you are responsible for somebody else's household and that is their paycheck. So definitely want to make sure to, have that piece, that lovely piece of paper, those financial statements that sometimes I know can look like Greek for some people, but there really is a good purpose for it. It really is a good purpose, especially when you have it set up with someone, with the help of someone, to be able to make sure that you have the confidence as a business owner.
I love that. Looking at your income over time, if you do have plans to scale, thinking about, well, is this income growing? Can I compare this year to last year or this quarter to last quarter if they're changing frequently? Breaking things out and seeing, are my expenses growing more than my income? Sometimes when you get to the point that you're going to hire the first employer, like, oh, well, I'm going to pay them $40,000 a year for a
Yep.
3/4 time employment. That's all it is. Well, it turns out,
Yes.
as you know, that all the software licenses, if you want that person to be able to log into your systems, the employment taxes, which you're going to be on the hook for, unemployment insurance, the insurance you need for workers' compensation. There's a variety of things that you need to account for, and it's always more than you assume when you just kind of do the back of the envelope assumption.
Yes. And that envelope can get wet.
Yes,
Maybe it's your coffee mug. And then what happens, you know?
exactly. Yes. Well, have you found, are there any cases where you were able to save clients money on their expenses once you were able to
Mm.
get things organized?
Yes. So I have this one client where they came to me and they were not able to track how much was being paid out for some of their subscriptions and
Ah,
dues. And so, and it was due to a miscategorization of the transaction. So once I went through to do a cleanup for them, they were shocked. They were absolutely shocked that they were spending, it was almost an upwards of like $10,000 a year when they didn't realize they hadn't canceled it and they should have canceled it a lot earlier. So that is one thing where you can see it, especially if you're reconciling your books on a regular basis. And I say books, books is an accountant term. So I'll correct that too. When someone is saying books, it is their accounting software. So just want to make sure I clarify that. Um, but yeah, it's one of the ways that when you're looking at your business transactions on a regular basis, you can catch those things, because a lot of times when you're operating in your business, the wheel of genius is the thing that lights you up, right? And for a lot of people, it's not the bookkeeping. And sometimes it's not the marketing. It's the whatever essence of the reason why you started your business. But if you take some time, or if you entrust someone to look into your transactions, they can give you that insight to say, here is your financial statement. This is what I've seen. And then that way, right away, you can notice like, oh, that seems a little high. Can you tell me what's in there? Drilling down really quickly can say, oh, I need to cancel it. Oh, I forgot to do that. Or, oh, hey, that's a fraudulent charge. That was not me. That's another thing I've seen as well, is fraudulent charges that come through, and it looks like a similar transaction, and it looks like it's not going to be egregious like a $10,000 transaction. Sometimes a lot of those fraud charges that are coming through are very small, like $19, $2, and they're coming in very slowly and very often. And then by the time, if you're not looking at it, you look at it too late, it could add up to be $20,000. So couple of things, or a couple of reasons that I'm able to see, and I'm saying, hey, you need to call the bank, you need to find out for this, change your card, get that taken care of before, any other fraudulent charges are coming through, or other additional charges are coming through.
yeah, I think that's one of the reasons why I would encourage people, if they're comfortable. Not everyone likes to log into software, but I
Yep.
cannot run my QuickBooks where I enter everything. I'm sure I could if that
Yep.
was my job 40 hours a week, but I do feel confident enough that I can drill down in my profit and loss reports, which is the report I pull up most often in QuickBooks, and say, oh, what's going on in that category? You need to know that too,
Yes.
because you, Renisa, aren't like, you are categorizing transactions, but you may or may not know when
Yes.
there's a new expense what it should be.
Correct.
And it may look like it's a, hotel, but it's actually something, a restaurant, for example, and the
Right.
restaurant
Correct.
expenses are only maybe 50% deductible. Um,
Yes. Yep.
so, and this is a really important reason too. I would assume you highly encourage people to segment out their personal expenses from their business
Yes.
expenses.
Correct. Yes, very much so. Especially from the beginning, because that's where you can get into the weeds really fast. I had an instance where I had a client that was using like a personal card to buy groceries. And in that instance, with buying the groceries, they also went and purchased paper that was for their business. So now we have this charge that's on their card of, let's just say, $100, but $20 is actually a business expense. Well, in that case, when you're going to, let's say, the store, you should have two different cards in your hands. And you go to the cashier and you say, hey, I have two different transactions, and you separate them right away. So that way you do not have to muddle it, especially when you're set up as an LLC or an actual legal entity. You definitely want to be careful, because that's part of the protection of having an LLC, is to separate you from the business. But if you're doing transactions that are muddled and myrtled together, that's where again, when you think worst case scenario, which I know if there's any lawyers, like they can explain it more than what I can. I'm not a lawyer, but that is where it can get really hard to justify certain transactions if you are staying in the weeds. So I understand initially too, there are some instances where someone may not realize like, hey, I don't know if I really want to make this official. I may not want to have it. And if you're operating as like a sole proprietor, which you're operating under your name, I still would advise to open a separate bank account. So if you have one bank account that's personal and that's where you're living expenses, having a separate personal bank account where you are just using that just for your business expenses of while you're thinking about it and while it's just a side hustle, that is still a good practice because now you're practicing of what you potentially would go through in the future if you do decide to change from being a sole proprietor to an official LLC or whatever other business entity that you're looking to set up.
I agree. And I always, even though I do have the separate accounts, there are sometimes times where you're like, oh, I gave my employee that business card, so I don't have it. So I always, at the end of the year, whenever I'm getting close to sending my CPA my tax return materials, go back through all of my credit card statements month by month, or if you have a year end statement, to make sure that there's not something that's justifiable, not blurring the lines, not stretching or cheating. But if there are
Yeah.
justifiable expenses that I forgot to put in the business accounts, then I submit for reimbursement or give
Yes.
my CPA that
Yeah.
information. I think that, one of the things to think about too is there's so much like, I think, well intended information that I may or may not be accurate. One of the things I hear from people is, oh, if I plan to retire or retire earlier, I have to have a side hustle. I have to have a quote unquote passive income stream. First of all,
Mhm.
I don't know many income streams that are easy and passive that pay you a
Right.
lot of money. Just FYI. And
Yep.
obviously, both of us are entrepreneurs ourselves, and we support entrepreneurs,
Yes.
and we're speaking to them and seeing them in this conversation. But at
Yes.
least I'm just gonna, cut to the chase on my opinion. Not everybody has to be a business owner. What are some
Right.
situations you've seen, Ranisa, where people are in a business, but it's not appropriate, or maybe they should consider another source of income or calling it a hobby?
Yes. So one thing that I've seen, let's just take like the farmers market, right? There are some hobbies and habits that it just makes you happy, and in
I
the
love that.
meantime, while it's making you happy, it's making money, right? But it might be money for your Starbucks run. It might be money for your, a trip or something that you're looking to save for. You're really not trying to, um, you know, grow it or scale it in a way. It's just something that it just makes you happy and it's, your fun money. In those instances, that is what I would call essentially like a side hustle, AKA a hobby. So if you're going to the farmer's market, there are business expenses such as the booth rental, if there's a booth rental, maybe some expenses in order to be able to create the craft, let's say you're making. But in those cases, that would be something that would be appropriate to where you would track on a spreadsheet because it's a one off and it's just something that you're doing just to make you happy. And then you can turn it off at any time. You're not really trying to do anything above and beyond in regards to growing it or hiring staff or things like that. It is just literally just some fun money on the side. That to me would be like a lemonade stand for a kid,
Mhm.
right? In the summer, they're just learning how to have a business. How to collect money, how to be a customer, or how to treat their customers well, and how to be a good steward of your customers and your expenses and creating the things like that. So that would be kind of an example that I would use to where you're like, sure, you are operating business like, but it's just for fun and you can turn it off at any time because it's not sustaining you and it's just for your enjoyment.
Well, and I would add, if you just consistently are in a business structure that is not making money, that you're losing money, that
Yes.
you're perhaps you have a sizable personal balance sheet, but it's risking that, and or
Yes.
you are in a relationship and your spouse has no clue that the business is just not, the heartbeat is not there.
Yeah.
Have
Yes.
some conversations, and if you can't fix it yourself, maybe you need Renisa to look at the books and say, oh, there's this, like, let's really restructure costs. Or
Yes.
maybe you need a personal financial planner to have a conversation about, this is what this business is threatening if we can't turn it around. And
Yes.
here, like, we need a realistic time frame for when we're going to address this, because otherwise, things aren't it it would limit your already prepared for retirement. The other thing I would mention is not everybody, it sounds like a dream. I'll work for
Mm.
myself. I don't know what you thought when you were like, completely tied up, hung up the W-2, but
Yeah.
I'll go on the boat whatever day I want to. Personally, my calendar is more busy as a business owner than it was as a W-2 employee. Um,
Yes.
Other people's problems are also my problems, and the
Yes.
buck stops here. And I love that.
Yes.
I do love that.
Yes.
But if it doesn't bring you joy, if, there's a lot of accountability,
Mhm.
there's a lot of having to learn, like, how do I get the internet wired in this office? Nobody else is
Yes.
going to do it for you. There's no help
Correct.
desk for that. So
That's right.
you got to think about, like, is this the point of your life that you want to be doing it? And the answer is okay
Yes.
if it's not.
I agree, because that is the part where I know that a lot of times, like when you're listening to, let's say, a YouTube video and you see someone that made the big jump and they're like, oh, I just left my 9 to 5 and now I work for myself, you're getting the aftermath. There are so many steps that are taking place for different individuals, and it may be unique to your situation. So if you have a unique situation that you have to cater to, it is completely okay if you're taking the baby steps as opposed to taking like a cold leap and you're just jumping out. Everyone has a goal. Everyone has, life that makes them feel good. And so, like Melissa was saying, there are so many other things that aren't shared publicly from other gurus that are the reality of there's no help desk. That was the one thing that I had working a government job. If my computer was not working, someone replaced it for me. All I had to do was send an email. Right now, if my computer doesn't work, I need to go and find and pay for a new computer. So definitely, more money, more expenses. And again, that might not seem like, oh, that's not too bad. We're just talking at the surface level. I know Melissa's probably heard some other stories as well in regards to some nightmare things that can happen too. Not to scare people, but it's the reality of the buck stops here. So if the customer is not happy, you are it. There is no manager that you forward
Yeah.
to.
Can I speak to the manager is just coming up the chain to you, or it starts with you
Yes.
and ends with you?
And ends with you. Yes.
Well,
Yep.
and when the people are on YouTube telling you about they just, they're getting in their private jet and they just sold their business, I can tell you a lot of people in the private jets are not publicizing that on YouTube. Usually, if they are, or
Right.
TikTok or Instagram, that's because they're selling
Yeah.
you something. And they may
Yeah.
be like, oh, I'm retired, but actually their new hustle is selling to you. And I
Yes.
think that's the other
Yep.
thing before we wrap up, I wanted to talk about. Like, there's so many they're not old wives' tales, new wives' tales
Yes.
about, like, hey, open an LLC and then start paying your family,
Mm,
and put all their income into Roth IRAs. And
got
or
it.
if you open a
Mhm.
business, you can get all these secret tax breaks and things like that.
Yep.
Um,
Yes.
Guys, it turns out that you still do have to pay taxes as a business owner. In fact, you pay more, not less.
Yes.
Self-employment taxes are beastly. And, if you have unjustifiable expenses, you cannot put them on your returns and feel comfortable
Yep.
about the threat of an audit. What are some of
Yep.
the things that you tell people when they're like, I must, I had a big unexpected tax bill that you need to prepare for your taxes too. You need to set aside money.
Right.
What do you tell them when they're like, there must be a magic wand where why aren't you just more aggressive on like finding more write offs?
So the thing is that a lot of times when people are asking those questions, it's already too late. So if we,
Sorry to
if
laugh.
we're, let's say, operating on like a regular calendar year, right? And so from January to December, if you're not working with someone that's specifically a tax strategist or a tax planner, then if you are asking these questions and you're at the table of filing your taxes, there really isn't hardly anything that tax person can do in that current year because the year is already closed. Now, currently, right now, and of course, at the time of this recording, you still have time to find a tax strategist, find a tax planner, to be able to sit down with someone, especially if you are self-employed, to say, "Hey, how can I maximize the revenue and expenses that I have and minimize my taxes that are due. And that's where, again, it comes handy to where if you have your books in order and you're able to be able to present that to them, it makes the conversation happen a lot easier and faster. So that way you can start implementing right away.
I love that. It does, the best thing is it's actually expenses that you had. So you
Hmm.
spent the money, but those
Yep.
are often there are more tax breaks for justifiable expenses like your
Yep.
subscriptions, dues, etc. That when you were an employee, you may not have been able to write off. The
Yep.
one thing that you sometimes can do when you're a solo owner of a business is a retirement plan after the end of the year. And but hey, guys, it turns out to get that break, you need to have money that you have are able to save and invest into retirement plans. But that can be huge. We do a
Hmm.
lot of advice on solo 401ks, which is for another episode. But there's no easy A. If you talk to somebody or you're listening on TikTok and they're like 25-year-old bro telling you about how to never pay the IRS, I just, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And so do get the
Yeah.
advice of CPA, bookkeeper, keep things
Yes.
organized. A personal financial planner can help you to navigate between what's going on in your business and what's going on in the rest of your life, including, for both of us, we're in relationships, bringing the spouse
Yes.
to the table because whether they are
Yes.
on the documents or not, they have exposure to
Yes.
your business. These are all words of advice to business owners.
Yes. Oh, yes.
Well, Renisa,
Really good tips.
yeah. Where can people find you if they want to learn more about you or Dreamjoy Consulting?
So I am on social media. I'm probably mostly active on Instagram and LinkedIn. At both places, you can find me at Dreamjoy Consulting. And you can also reach out on my website, and it's dreamjoyconsulting.com.
Perfect. Well, we'll make sure to have that in the show notes. And we so appreciate the conversation. I love
Yes.
talking to you, Renisa. We sit on a shared committee, the finance committee for the Women's Center of
Yes.
Southeast Michigan. And you do great work. And also, I know you're doing great work on behalf of your clients. So keep up the great entrepreneurial dreams. Keep them coming.
Thank you. And thank you so much for having me and for being able to have a conversation with you and your audience.
Awesome. Thank you for listening to the Women's Money Wisdom Podcast. If you found value in this episode, the best way you can support the podcast is to forward an episode to a friend or leave a review. Go to pearlplan.com and the podcast link to get all the resources and links mentioned.